August 19, 1944, Trun, Normandy, France. Dawn arrived slowly through thick fog that blanketed the devastated fields, transforming charred trees into black phantoms against a lead-colored sky. The acrid smell of burned diesel mixed with the metallic odor of earth churned by tank treads, penetrating through any mask, any water-soaked cloth. The silence was dense, almost solid, broken only by the occasional crackling of wood burning 300 meters away. Major James Robert MacDonald, 34 years old, C Squadron of the South Alberta Regiment, adjusted the headset over his ears while his fingers, still stiff from the dawn cold, checked for the third time the elevation mechanism of the 17-pounder gun mounted in the elongated nose of his Sherman Firefly. His hands didn't tremble, not anymore, not after 17 months of combat since Sicily, but his jaw remained clenched, muscles tensed to the point of pain. In the last 96 hours, his squadron had destroyed 47 German armored vehicles, at the cost of 11 of their own Shermans, and 34 men killed. The numbers should have meant victory, should have. But now, something different. His observers reported a column of at least 23 Tigers from the 102nd SS Panzer Battalion at exactly 8.7 kilometers southeast, moving in tight formation through the Falaise corridor, desperate to escape the encirclement closing like steel jaws. What happens in the next 2 hours and 17 minutes will establish the record for Tigers destroyed by a single Canadian unit in direct combat, a record that remains to this day, documented but rarely celebrated. But more than that, it will demonstrate something that German panzer commanders never internalized, even possessing detailed intelligence reports about Allied technical capabilities. The absolute difference between knowing specifications on paper and facing real tactical integration on the battlefield. The Canadians of the South Alberta Regiment didn't just have more tanks or more ammunition, advantages that Germans had learned to neutralize through positioning and superior fire discipline. They had something far more dangerous: precise mathematics transformed into tungsten, accelerated to velocities that turned 200mm hardened steel into something as resistant as wet paper. If you love stories of soldiers who broke technical impossibilities through surgical coldness under fire, not movie heroism, but lethal competence applied without hesitation, hit subscribe, because what comes next will reveal exactly how many seconds a Tiger commander had between detecting the flash of a 17-pounder and feeling his 11-ton turret transform into a furnace at 1400 degrees Celsius. Section 2. Psychological Cultural Context. To understand why the destruction of 23 Tigers in 2 hours and 17 minutes represented such a devastating psychological shock to the SS Panzer commanders who survived to report it, you need to go back to the 1930s, when German panzer doctrine crystallized around a central assumption that would prove to be simultaneously their greatest triumph and their fatal trap. The Panzerwaffe doctrine didn't emerge from empty arrogance. It originated from Heinz Guderian and his meticulous analysis of the Battle of Cambrai in 1917, where British tanks penetrated German lines considered impenetrable. 3 central assumptions dominated German thinking in 1944. First, superior armor and firepower concentrated in heavy platforms would always defeat superior numbers of medium tanks. The Tiger I, with its 200mm of frontal armor and 88mm KWK-36 gun, could destroy any Sherman at 2,500 meters while remaining invulnerable to the standard 75mm M3 until suicidal distances below 300 meters. Second, German crews, trained for a minimum of 18 months versus 12 weeks for Allied crews, would compensate for any numerical disadvantage through fire discipline and superior tactics. Statistics validated this confidence. The average kill ratio per Tiger in Normandy was 5.7 Allied tanks before being destroyed. Third, Allies, especially Canadians and British, would privilege caution over aggression, allowing panzer forces to control the pace and location of engagements. Colonel Heinrich Müller of the 102nd SS Panzer Battalion wrote in his tactical diary on August 12, 1944, "Commonwealth forces demonstrate technical competence but lack the will for decisive close action. Our Tigers need only maintain discipline and exploit their range advantage." This wasn't ignorance. German intelligence possessed extensive information. Military attachés in Washington since 1937, industrial spy networks in America, Captured technical documents guaranteed they knew about Allied developments. They knew the British 17-pounder anti-tank gun existed. They knew its theoretical muzzle velocity of 2,900 feet per second. They knew tungsten carbide ammunition-piercing composite rigid rounds were in development. What they didn't capture, what they couldn't internalize until first contact analysis after battle, interrogation of prisoners, was the integration. The difference between knowing a weapon exists and understanding how Commonwealth forces had solved the impossibly complex problem of mounting a gun designed for towed artillery into the cramped turret of a Sherman tank while maintaining accuracy, rate of fire, and crew survivability. German engineers calculated it was impossible. The 17-pounder's recoil would tear a Sherman turret from its mounting. The length of the barrel would make the tank nose-heavy and uncontrollable. The ammunition was too large for a four-man crew to handle at combat speed. They were wrong about all of it. The irony. German procurement had devoted 47,000 tons of molybdenum steel and 18,000 hours of specialized training preparing crews to face the American 76mm gun they knew was coming. They built Zimmerit paste coating on every Tiger to defeat magnetic mines they feared. They thickened armor on the Panther to resist the Soviet 85mm. What they didn't prepare for was a 29-year-old lieutenant in the British Royal Ordnance Factory named George Brighty, who, in November 1943, solved the recoil problem not through advanced hydraulics or exotic materials, but through ruthlessly simple geometry. Cut away the Sherman's hull, extend the recoil mechanism backward into the crew compartment, and accept that the loader would have to work in a space barely wider than his shoulders. Elegance through brutal pragmatism. Very Canadian, very effective. Now James Robert MacDonald, born March 7, 1910 in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada, third son of Robert MacDonald, railway engineer, and Margaret MacDonald, née Fletcher, schoolteacher. Two older brothers, William, who would die at Dieppe in 1942, and Thomas, who survived the war to never speak of it. One younger sister, Elizabeth, who wrote him letters every week that he read once and burned immediately, unable to bear rereading them. Pre-war, James taught mathematics at Medicine Hat High School. Not history, not literature. Mathematics. Cold, precise, unforgiving mathematics, where problems had solutions and solutions could be verified. His students remembered him as fair but demanding, a man who accepted no approximations, no close-enough answers. When asked why he was so strict, he would say, "In the real world, close enough gets people killed." He had no idea how prophetic that would become. James wanted to study engineering at the University of Alberta. His father's salary couldn't support it. He took the teaching position at 22, planning to save money, planning to apply in a few years. Then the Depression hit. Then his father's hours were cut. Then saving became survival. Then 1939 arrived. He enlisted September 12, 1939. Not drafted, volunteered. 3 days after Canada declared war. When his mother asked why so quickly, he said, "Because the math doesn't work, Ma. Germany has more factories, more steel, more trained soldiers. Every day we wait, the equation gets worse." Basic training at Camp Borden, Ontario. 12 weeks that should have broken him. Didn't. His instructors noted he possessed an almost pathological attention to detail, triple-checking every weapon assembly, every maintenance procedure, every coordinate calculation. His fellow trainees mocked him, called him the Professor. The name stuck. Selected for Armored Corps not because of physical prowess. At 5'9" and 157 pounds, he was average in every physical metric, but because during gunnery assessment, he achieved 17 hits on 19 shots at moving targets at 800 yards. The gunnery sergeant wrote, "Cadet MacDonald doesn't aim, he calculates." His instructor at Armored School was Captain William Morrison, a First World War veteran who'd fought at Vimy Ridge. Morrison walked with a limp from shrapnel still embedded in his hip. He taught the recruits one lesson James never forgot. A tank is mathematics made into steel. Angle of armor, velocity of projectile, distance to target, wind speed, barrel temperature. It's all just numbers. The crew that does the math faster kills the crew that doesn't. James's first combat was July 10, 1943. Sicily, landing at Pacino. His Sherman took fire from a concealed German PaK-40 anti-tank gun at 600 meters. The 75mm round punched through the side armor, killing his gunner and loader instantly. James, spattered with their blood, smoke filling the compartment, cordite burning his lungs, had exactly 4 seconds before the next round would arrive to make a decision. bail out and abandon the tank, or traverse the turret and fire back. He calculated. Pack 40 rate of fire, 14 rounds per minute. Time between shots, 4.3 seconds. Time to traverse turret 60 degrees at combat speed, 3.1 seconds. Time to acquire target and fire, 1.8 seconds. Total, 4.9 seconds. Not enough time. He fired anyway. Blind shot, unable to see through the smoke, using his last known bearing of the German position, and compensating for the fact that his tank was now listing 7 degrees to starboard from the damaged suspension. Hit. First shot. The Park 40 exploded. His driver, Corporal Michael O'Brien, turned and looked at him through the smoke and said, "Jesus Christ, sir, how did you—" James cut him off. "Math, O'Brien, just math." But that night, alone in his bedroll, James vomited until his stomach was empty, then dry-heaved for another 10 minutes. He'd calculated the shot. He hadn't calculated that the German gun crew would still be visible through the smoke after his shell hit, hadn't calculated that he would see the loader, a boy who couldn't have been older than 18, stumbling away from the wreckage with his uniform on fire, screaming in German words James didn't understand, but whose meaning was universal. He wrote in his diary that night, "I killed 3 men today with mathematics. I wonder if Pythagoras ever had nightmares." The moral crisis came in October 1943 during the advance toward Ortona. His squadron was ordered to fire high-explosive shells into a building where German snipers were positioned. Intelligence said 3 to 5 snipers. James could see through his periscope that the building was clearly residential. Washing hung on lines. A child's toy. A wooden horse sat on the front step. He radioed his commander. "Sir, recommend reconnaissance before fire mission. Building appears civilian occupied." The response was immediate. "MacDonald, you have your orders. Fire mission approved. Execute." James sat for 17 seconds, his hand on the firing lever, while his gunner looked at him, waiting. He executed the order. 6 high-explosive rounds. The building collapsed. When infantry cleared the rubble, they found 5 German snipers dead. Also found 2 Italian civilians, an elderly man and a woman, crushed in the basement where they'd been hiding. That night, Corporal O'Brien found James sitting alone and asked the question that had been building since Sicily. "Does it bother you, sir? The math of it? Calculating how to kill people like it's just numbers?" James was quiet for a long time. Then, "It bothers me every single day, O'Brien. But if I stop calculating, if I start feeling instead of thinking, I'll make mistakes, and my mistakes get our men killed. So I do the math, and I have the nightmares. And I hope that when this is over, if I survive, the nightmares will fade." O'Brien asked, "Do you think they will, sir? Fade?" James didn't answer. By August 1944, James Robert MacDonald had calculated firing solutions for 173 enemy targets. He knew this number precisely because he kept a log, recording every engagement, every shot, every result. 173 targets destroyed. Estimated enemy killed, between 420 and 490, based on standard crew complements and infantry formations. He never rounded the numbers, never estimated when he could calculate precisely, because imprecision felt like dishonesty, and if he was going to carry the weight of those deaths, he needed to know exactly how much he was carrying. Section 3. Visceral Technical Innovation. The weapon that Canadian and British forces received in early 1944 was officially designated the Ordnance Quick-Firing 17-pounder Mark IV, mounted in Sherman tank variant Sherman 1C, commonly called the Sherman Firefly. For the engineers who designed it, it was a marvel of compromised ballistics and forced integration of incompatible systems. For the soldiers who would operate it and depend on it for survival, it was simply called the Long Gun. The projectile was designated Armor-Piercing Discarding Sabot, or APDS, tungsten carbide core, 17 pounds total mass, 76.2 millimeters diameter. When fired, the tungsten penetrator separated from its sabot at muzzle exit, accelerating to 3,550 feet per second, faster than sound travels in warm air by a factor of 3.1. At that velocity, when tungsten carbide met hardened steel, it didn't penetrate in the traditional sense. The kinetic energy was so concentrated that the molecular bonds of the armor simply failed. Steel that could deflect conventional armor-piercing rounds, designed to punch through, instead vaporized at the point of contact, creating a plasma jet that carved through armor like hot wire through butter left in summer sun. The impact zone heated to 1200 degrees Celsius in 0.003 seconds, hot enough to melt titanium, hot enough to turn the interior of a tank into a blast furnace where air itself became a weapon. The gun's recoil was savage. Firing it felt like being inside a bell while it was struck by a sledgehammer. The hydraulic recoil system absorbed force that would otherwise tear human shoulders from sockets, but it couldn't absorb the noise. 173 decibels at muzzle, loud enough to cause permanent hearing damage after 3 shots without protection. Crews wore headphones, but the sound came through bones, through chest cavities, a physical pressure that felt like being underwater during an explosion. The gun barrel measured 14 feet 2 inches, so long that it required counterweights and special handling during transport. Sherman tanks mounting it had to have the bow machine gun removed entirely to compensate for weight distribution. The tank became nose-heavy, requiring constant attention from drivers to prevent the front from digging in during rough terrain. Inside the turret, space became a nightmare. The standard Sherman Firefly crew worked in a compartment where the loader could not fully extend his arms. Loading the 17-pounder round, 35 inches long, weighing 42 pounds, required a specific sequence of movements that had to be executed in darkness, in smoke, while the tank was moving while under fire, in exactly the same way every time, or the breech wouldn't close. The development was born from desperation. In November 1943, British armour in Italy was being systematically destroyed by German Tigers and Panthers. The standard 75mm Sherman gun was useless at any range beyond point-blank suicide distance. Churchill tanks were too slow. Cromwell tanks were too lightly armoured. The British needed a tank that could kill Tigers before Tigers killed them, and they needed it in months, not years. Major George Brighty of the Royal Ordnance Factory received an impossible assignment: mount the 17-pounder anti-tank gun designed for towed artillery into a Sherman tank and make it work. Every formal analysis said it was impossible. The gun was too long, the recoil was too powerful, the ammunition was too large. The Sherman turret ring wasn't designed for it. The mounting would fail, the crew would be crushed, the tank would flip backward from recoil during firing. Brighty ignored the analyses, started with basic physics. Recoil force equals mass times velocity. Can't change the gun, can't change the ammunition, can change where the recoil goes. He cut the Sherman hull, extended the recoil mechanism backward into the crew compartment, removed the radio operator position entirely, accepted that the loader would work in a space barely wider than his body, calculated that it would work. February 14th, 1944. First live fire test at Lulworth Ranges, England. Observing officers included 3 brigadiers, 2 colonels, a major general, and Winston Churchill's personal military advisor. Consensus prediction: catastrophic failure within 3 shots. First shot, gun fired. Tank rocked backward. Recoil mechanism held. Barrel alignment maintained. Target: Tiger I frontal armor replica at 1,000 yards, penetrated completely. Tungsten core exiting rear armor and continuing for another 400 yards before impacting hillside. Silence. Then one of the brigadiers said, "Fire again." Second shot, same result. Third shot, same result. Fourth shot, same result. After 17 consecutive shots without failure, Major General Percy Hobart walked to the tank, climbed onto the hull, looked inside the turret at the cramped nightmare where the crew had been working, and said to Brighty, "This is the most brutally inelegant thing I've ever seen. I want 500 of them, yesterday." Production began March 1944. Each Firefly cost $7,300 to convert, twice the cost of a standard Sherman. Tungsten was desperately scarce, rationed for machine tools and armor-piercing ammunition. Each APDS round required tungsten that could have made 15 cutting tools for bomber production. They made them anyway. The system worked like this. First, the gunner acquired target through the periscope sight, a 17-power magnification optical system that allowed identification of tank types at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, like looking through a telescope, but with crosshairs calibrated for ballistic drop at specific ranges. Second, the gunner calculated range using a stadimetric rangefinder built into the sight. If you knew a Tiger I was 10 feet tall and it appeared a certain size in the reticle, geometry gave you exact range. Time required, 3 to 5 seconds for a trained gunner. Third, the gunner adjusted elevation and traverse while calling out range and target type to the loader. The loader selected ammunition, APDS for armor, high explosive for soft targets, and loaded in one smooth motion that took between 4 and 6 seconds. Fourth, gunner made final adjustments for target movement, wind, barrel temperature effects on muzzle velocity, and fired. Total time from target acquisition to shot, 12 to 18 seconds for a trained crew. James McDonald's crew averaged 9.3 seconds. The mathematics was elegant. Range to target, determined by geometry. Ballistic trajectory determined by physics. Wind deflection calculated from smoke drift. Temperature effects compensated from tables memorized during training. Every shot was a calculus problem solved in real time, under conditions where failure meant death. This wasn't observation visual or crew intuition or trial and error based on hope or courage or years of experience. This was applied physics and mechanical analog computation and optical rangefinding transformed into surgical, mathematical, implacable lethality. By August 1944, Canadian and British armoured units had received 347 Fireflies. Standard tactical doctrine, 1 Firefly per troop of 4 tanks. The Firefly stayed back, used its superior range and penetration to kill enemy heavy armour, while standard Shermans provided close support and suppressive fire. German intelligence knew about Fireflies. They'd captured damaged ones. They'd interrogated prisoners. They knew the gun could penetrate Tiger frontal armour at 1,000 meters. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know until they experienced it, was what it felt like to be inside a Tiger when an APDS round moving at 3,550 feet per second hit. The difference between theoretical knowledge and visceral reality. The difference between reading about fire and burning. Section 4. Cinematic Climax. August 19, 1944, 05:47 hours, Trun, Normandy, France. Temperature 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility 400 meters in morning fog. Wind 3 kilometers per hour from northwest. The sound of distant artillery, Canadian 25-pounders, rumbled like continuous thunder from the north. James Robert McDonald sat in the commander's position of Firefly number Baker 23, his headset pressed against ears that still rang from yesterday's engagement. Through the periscope, he could see nothing but grey fog and black silhouettes of destroyed vehicles from previous fighting. The metallic taste of adrenaline filled his mouth. He thought, just one thought, let them surrender. Please, God, let them just surrender. They didn't. At 06:23 hours, Forward Observer Lieutenant Thomas Cunningham radioed from his concealed position in the ruins of a farmhouse 800 meters east. Baker 2-3, this is Oscar 4. Multiple contacts, bearing 115 degrees, range 8,700 meters. Count 2-3, repeat 2-3 Tigers, in column formation, moving northwest at approximately 12 kilometers per hour. They're running blind in this fog. Over. McDonald's heart didn't race. His hands didn't shake. He simply began calculating. 23 Tigers, 4 Fireflies in his troop. Standard engagement range 1,000 to 1,500 meters for guaranteed penetration. Current visibility 400 meters. They'd have to wait. Let the Tigers come closer. Let them enter the kill zone. He keyed the radio. All Baker units. This is Baker 2-3. Hold position. Maintain silence. Engage on my command only. Target priority. Lead and trail vehicles first. Trap the column. Out. C Squadron held 6 Fireflies total plus 14 standard Shermans. Against 23 Tigers, the mathematics were brutal. Tigers had superior armor, superior guns, superior optics. The only advantages McDonald had were surprise, position, and the fact that German commanders still didn't fully believe Fireflies could kill them at range. That belief was about to be corrected permanently. 0641 hours. Visibility improving. Fog lifting. The lead Tiger emerged from the mist at range 2,100 meters, hull down behind a low ridge, only turret visible. McDonald could see through his sight the commander standing in the cupola, scanning with binoculars, confident in his invulnerability. Oberst Heinrich Müller, 43 years old, commander of the 102nd SS Panzer Battalion Lead Tiger, veteran of Poland, France, Russia, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, father of 2 daughters he would never see again. McDonald spoke quietly into the intercom. Gunner, target tank, commander's cupola, range 2100 meters. His gunner, Sergeant William Foster, 26 years old from Halifax, Nova Scotia, traversed the gun and acquired the target through his sight. Identified Tiger 1, Range confirmed 2100. Loader, Private David Chen, 22 years old from Vancouver, already had an APDS round in his hands. APDS loaded. MacDonald made the final calculations in his head. Range 2,100 meters. Tiger moving at 8 kilometers per hour, left to right. Wind negligible. Temperature effects minimal at this range. Lead target by 1.3 meters. Elevation plus 2.7 degrees. He said, "Fire when ready." Foster breathed out, squeezed the trigger. The 17-pounder fired. The sound was apocalyptic. The tank rocked backward. Smoke and flame erupted from the muzzle. The APDS round left the barrel at 3,550 feet per second. Time of flight, 2.1 seconds. Inside Miller's Tiger, the first indication of danger was a flash, brilliant orange-white, from the fog line 2,000 meters away. Then nothing. Then impact. The APDS round hit the Tiger's turret front, 3 centimeters left of the gun mantlet. At impact velocity, the tungsten penetrator didn't bounce, didn't deflect. It simply converted its kinetic energy into heat and pressure and molecular destruction. The armor failed. Not slowly, instantly. A hole 8 centimeters diameter appeared in 200 millimeter steel, edges glowing orange, then white. Behind the hole, the tungsten core and a jet of vaporized armor and copper and steel traveling at 15,000 meters per second entered the fighting compartment. Miller, standing in the cupola, felt something hit his leg. Felt it for exactly 0.7 seconds before the pressure wave from the penetration ruptured both eardrums simultaneously. He looked down and saw his left leg below the knee simply gone, not cut, not torn, gone, vaporized by the metal jet. He opened his mouth to scream. The gunner Unterscharführer Klaus Weber, 29 years old, died instantly. The penetration entered through the turret front, traveled through his chest at 15,000 meters per second, exited through his back, continued through the radio equipment, and embedded itself in the rear turret armor. Weber's last thought was incomplete. He was calculating his own firing solution when he stopped existing. The loader, Grenadier Fritz Hartmann, 19 years old, 2 months in combat, tried to bail out. Got one hand on the turret hatch before the secondary explosion. Ammunition cooking off from the heat broke his spine and threw him against the turret ring. He lived for another 40 seconds, paralyzed, unable to move, unable to scream, as the temperature inside the tank climbed past 600 degrees and his uniform began to smoke. The driver, Unteroffizier Johann Schmidt, 31 years old, father of 3, sat in the hull with 3 centimeters of armor between him and escape. He pulled the hatch release. Stuck. The tank's suspension had settled into soft ground, jamming the hatch against the frame. He pulled harder. It wouldn't move. The screaming from the turret stopped. The heat increased. He could smell his hair burning. He managed to scream once before the ammunition magazine detonated, and the Tiger's turret, 11 tons of steel, launched straight up, rotated 90 degrees, and crashed down 15 meters away. From start to finish, 11 seconds. Forward observer Cunningham, watching through binoculars, keyed his radio. Good kill, target destroyed, immediate panic in German column, multiple vehicles stopping, turrets traversing, attempting to locate firing position. MacDonald was already selecting his next target, the trail Tiger, now 2,300 meters away, attempting to reverse behind cover. Gunner, target tank, hull, range 2300. Identified. APDS loaded. Fire. Second shot. Time of flight, 2.4 seconds. Impact, lower hull driver's compartment, penetration complete. The Tiger's frontal transmission, a complex assembly of gears and shafts and seals filled with 30 gallons of flammable hydraulic fluid, exploded. The driver and bow gunner died in fire that reached 1100 degrees Celsius. They died screaming, but no one could hear them over the sound of burning fuel and exploding ammunition. The other 3 Fireflies in MacDonald's troop opened fire. Ranges between 1,800 and 2,400 meters. 4 shots, 3 hits, 1 near miss that nonetheless disabled the target's tracks. The German column, trapped on a narrow road with destroyed tanks at front and rear, tried to scatter. Individual Tigers turned off the road into fields, attempting to flank, attempting to locate their attackers, attempting anything but sitting stationary. It didn't matter. A Tiger moving at 12 kilometers per hour across uneven ground while turning is not a difficult ballistic problem. Range, velocity, angle of traverse, just mathematics. Mathematics that British and Canadian gunners had practiced on ranges at Lulworth for 6 months. Mathematics that German crews, trained to engage at closer ranges against inferior tanks, hadn't needed to master. Tiger 3, hit at 1900 meters. Penetration through turret side. All crew dead within 8 seconds from overpressure and fragmentation. Tiger 5, hit at 2100 meters. Penetration through hull rear, engine compartment. Fire spread to crew compartment. 3 crew bailed out, uniforms burning, cut down by Canadian infantry with Bren guns. They died 50 meters from their tank. Tiger 7, hit at 2000 meters. First shot glanced off frontal slope armor. Second shot, 4 seconds later, penetrated driver's vision port. The driver's head simply ceased to exist. The Tiger continued moving forward on momentum, crew dead or incapacitated, and rolled into an anti-tank ditch where it burned for 3 hours. The German company commander, Hauptmann Werner Vogel, 40 years old, veteran of the entire Russian front, tried to coordinate a response, ordered all Tigers to deploy smoke, ordered return fire at suspected positions, ordered tactical withdrawal to alternate positions. The smoke deployed. Thick white phosphorus smoke that should have obscured the battlefield, would have worked against visual targeting, didn't work against gunners who had precise range cards, who had memorized every landmark, every distance, who could fire by geometry even when they couldn't see the target. Tiger 9, destroyed through smoke at 2300 meters. Tiger 11, destroyed at 1900 meters. Tiger 13, disabled, entire crew bailed out and surrendered, hands raised screaming "Kamerad," while Canadian infantry secured them. Vogel's Tiger took 2 hits. First penetrated the turret, killing his gunner and loader. Vogel, wounded, right arm shattered by fragmentation, tried to radio battalion headquarters. Got through. "We are under attack by unknown weapon. Effective range over 2000 meters. Frontal armor ineffective. Request immediate." Second penetration hit his engine compartment, cut transmission. Fire began. Vogel and his driver escaped. Vogel lived until 1989, dying in Stuttgart. In 1970, interviewed for a German military history project, he said, "We knew about the Firefly gun intellectually. We had test reports, we had penetration tables, but knowing and experiencing are different universes. When I saw Müller's Tiger, a machine we thought was invincible, explode from a shot we couldn't see from a distance we thought was safe, I understood we had lost not just the battle, but the entire concept we'd built our armor doctrine on." The engagement continued for 1 hour and 47 minutes. Standard Shermans moved in, providing suppressive fire, cutting off escape routes. Canadian infantry advanced, securing surrendering crews, eliminating those who chose to fight. By 8:31 hours, silence. The smell of burning rubber, burning diesel, burning flesh hung thick in air that was warming as the sun burned through the remaining fog. 23 Tigers had entered the kill zone. 23 Tigers were destroyed or disabled. Not a single Canadian tank was lost to enemy fire. 1 Firefly damaged by mechanical failure. 3 Standard Shermans damaged by anti-tank rifle fire from German infantry, repairable within 24 hours. When James MacDonald compiled the casualty report at 1400 hours, sitting in a requisitioned farmhouse, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking despite all his efforts to control them, the numbers were precise. German losses: 23 Tigers destroyed, 17 burning completely, 6 disabled but recoverable, 91 crew killed, 18 wounded and captured, 6 captured unwounded. Canadian losses: 0 tanks destroyed by enemy fire, 2 men wounded by shell fragments during infantry engagement, 0 dead. MacDonald looked at those numbers, thought about Müller, who he'd never met, but whose death he'd calculated and executed, thought about the 19-year-old loader burning alive, thought about the driver whose head had stopped existing when tungsten traveling at 3,000 feet per second met human skull. He wrote in his diary that night, "We killed 91 men today using mathematics and tungsten and physics. Complete victory by every measurable metric. I have never felt less victorious in my life." Section 5. Late Discovery. 63 years later, February 2007, Margaret Fraser, 74 years old, retired librarian from Medicine Hat, Alberta, was cleaning out her late mother's attic when she found a metal ammunition box, painted olive drab, hidden behind insulation in the rafters. Inside, 417 letters. Her Uncle James's war correspondence, Every letter he'd sent home between 1939 and 1945, plus 47 letters he'd written but never mailed, marked unsendable in his handwriting. Margaret had heard stories about Uncle James, the quiet math teacher who became a war hero, the man who never talked about the war, the uncle who killed himself in 1961 with his service revolver in the garage of his Medicine Hat home, leaving a note that said only, "The numbers finally added up." The mailed letters were cheerful, carefully censored, full of reassurances and requests for news from home. The unmailed letters were different. August 20th, 1944, James wrote, but never sent. "Dear Mother, yesterday I killed more men than I can count precisely. The official tally is 91 enemy dead, but that's just the ones we recovered. How many burned inside tanks we couldn't approach? How many wounded died later? The mathematics of death are imprecise, and that imprecision haunts me more than the deaths themselves. I have become a very efficient killer. The army will likely give me a medal. I will accept it and say thank you and feel nothing but shame." September 3rd, 1944. I dream in equations now, ballistic coefficients and armor penetration tables. I wake up calculating how many seconds a man has between the moment tungsten enters his tank and the moment he stops screaming. The answer is usually between 7 and 14 seconds, depending on where the penetration occurs. I know this because I've seen it 47 times now. 47 times I have calculated death and executed calculation and watched the result. The mathematics are always correct. The humanity is always destroyed. October 17th, 1944. Corporal O'Brien asked me yesterday if I pray. I told him I used to. I don't anymore. I tried. I can't form the words. Every time I close my eyes to pray, I see numbers, kill ratios, penetration depths, casualty statistics. God, if he exists, doesn't speak in mathematics, and mathematics are the only language I understand anymore. November 29th, 1944. I received a letter from William Morrison, my old instructor from Armored School. He congratulated me on my outstanding combat effectiveness. He included the statistics: 193 enemy armored vehicles destroyed, estimated 450 to 520 enemy killed, all while losing only 11 tanks and 34 men from my squadron. He wrote that I've achieved the best kill ratio of any Commonwealth armor commander in the European theater. I read his letter 3 times, trying to feel pride. I felt nothing. Then I went outside and vomited until my ribs ached. December 24th, 1944, Christmas Eve. The men are singing carols. O'Brien has a surprisingly good voice. They're singing Silent Night. I'm sitting in my tank, calculating how many German families will have empty chairs at Christmas dinner, because I did my job effectively. The mathematics are straightforward. 23 tanks, 4-man crews minimum, some 5-man, average 4.3 men per tank. 98.9 fathers or sons or brothers who will never come home. I calculated their deaths. I am very good at my job. I will never forgive myself for how good I am at my job. January 18th, 1945. I wonder if the Germans I kill have names. Of course they do. I try not to think about their names. Names are human, calculations are not. If I start thinking of them as humans with names and families and lives interrupted, I won't be able to calculate their deaths anymore. And if I can't calculate their deaths, I'll make mistakes. And mistakes get my men killed, so I reduce them to targets: armor thickness, range, wind speed, fire, confirm kill, move to next calculation. This is how I survive. This is how I kill myself slowly while staying alive. Margaret Fraser donated the letters to the Canadian War Museum in 2008. The museum archivist, Dr. Robert Chen, spent 2 years analyzing them for a paper titled The Psychological Cost of Technical Competence, PTSD in Armored Warfare. Chen wrote, "MacDonald's letters reveal a common pattern among highly effective combat soldiers: the creation of psychological distance through technical language. By converting killing into mathematics, soldiers like MacDonald could function at peak efficiency. But this conversion created a dissociative state that post-war manifested as severe PTSD, depression, and eventual suicide." MacDonald's 1961 suicide note, "The numbers finally added up," suggests he finally performed the calculation he'd been avoiding for 16 years, whether the mathematical certainty of his wartime effectiveness justified the human cost of its continuation. In 1947, 2 years after the war ended, James MacDonald was invited to a ceremony in Ottawa to receive the Distinguished Service Order for his actions at Troon. He attended, shook hands with the Governor-General, accepted the medal, said, "Thank you." His sister Elizabeth, who attended with him, later wrote, "James looked like himself, but wasn't himself. He smiled at the right times. He said the right words, but his eyes were empty." At the reception afterward, an officer asked him about the battle, asked him how it felt to achieve such a decisive victory. James said very quietly, "It felt like mathematics, just mathematics." The officer laughed, thinking James was being modest. James didn't laugh. He left the reception 20 minutes later. He never wore the medal. Post-war, James returned to teaching mathematics at Medicine Hat High School. His students from 1946 to 1961 remembered him as competent but distant, no longer demanding, no longer strict about precision. One student interviewed in 2009 said, "Mr. MacDonald would teach us equations, and sometimes he'd stop mid-sentence and stare out the window for 30 seconds. Then he'd continue like nothing happened. We thought he was just absent-minded. Now I know he was probably seeing tanks burning." James married in 1949, divorced in 1956. His ex-wife, Patricia MacDonald née Wilson, refused all interview requests until her death in 2004. In her will, she left a sealed letter to be opened after her death and donated to the War Museum. The letter said, "James had nightmares every night, every single night. He would wake up screaming numbers. 2,100 meters, elevation 2.7 degrees, fire, over and over. I tried to help. He wouldn't talk about it. He said talking was imprecise, and imprecision was dishonest. I loved him, but I couldn't live with a ghost." He died in 1945. His body just didn't realize it until 1961. Section 6. Documented trauma. Dr. Robert Morrison, VA psychiatrist who treated MacDonald from 1952 to 1955, left extensive notes that were declassified in 1995 under Canadian privacy law. The notes reveal a man trapped in recursive calculation. Session notes, March 14, 1953. Patient reports inability to perform simple daily mathematics without intrusive combat imagery. States he cannot calculate grocery bills without seeing armor penetration tables. Cannot measure distances without converting to firing ranges. Describes this as contamination of pure mathematics by applied death. Prescribed sedatives for nightmares. Patient states sedatives don't work because the calculations continue while I'm unconscious. Session notes, July 22, 1954. Patient brought in his war diary. Read aloud entry from August 19, 1944. Began crying halfway through first emotional display in 18 months of treatment. Stated, "I was so good at killing. I was better at calculating death than I ever was at teaching life. What does that make me?" Unable to formulate therapeutic response. Patient left session early. Session notes, November 8, 1955. Patient terminated treatment today. States therapy is ineffective because you're trying to help me forgive myself, but forgiveness requires rounding down the numbers, and I can't round down. I killed between 450 and 520 men. I can't say approximately 500. Approximation is dishonesty. And if I'm precise, how do I forgive precisely 487 deaths? Asked patient how he calculated 487, if earlier he said range was 450 to 520. Patient said he'd been working through unit records and cross-referencing German casualty reports for 3 years. He knows now. Precisely. 487. Suggested this precision-seeking might be pathological. Patient agreed completely. Left anyway. James MacDonald's final diary entry, dated November 17, 1961, 1 day before his suicide. "I have finally calculated the equation I've been avoiding. On one side, 487 enemy dead, 34 of my own men dead. War ended slightly earlier because of my technical competence. On the other side, 16 years of nightmares, 1 failed marriage, 0 ability to experience joy, and the certain knowledge that I am fundamentally a killer who happens to teach mathematics, rather than a mathematics teacher who had to kill. The equation does not balance. It never will. The only variable I can still control is duration. I'm sorry, Elizabeth. I'm sorry, Mother." The numbers finally added up. Section 7. Legacy and Irony. The Battle of Trun, August 19, 1944, remains in Canadian military records as one of the most one-sided armoured victories in Commonwealth history. 23 Tigers destroyed for 0 friendly losses. Perfect execution of technical superiority and tactical surprise. The after-action report, written by MacDonald himself, is a masterpiece of technical precision. 19 pages. Every shot documented, every range recorded, every result verified. No emotion, no reflection, just mathematics transformed into military efficiency. The report ends. Enemy forces destroyed through application of superior gunnery and tactical positioning. Recommend continued deployment of Firefly tanks in anti-armor role. Recommend standardization of APDS ammunition across all 17-pounder platforms. Recommend additional training in long-range gunnery for all armor crews. It doesn't mention Müller burning, doesn't mention Hartmann dying paralyzed, doesn't mention the smell. The irony, everything MacDonald recommended was implemented. By 1945, Firefly tactics were standard across Commonwealth armor. The 17-pounder became the basis for post-war British tank gun development. Long-range precision gunnery became doctrine. James Robert helped revolutionize armored warfare. His techniques, his calculations, his methods are still taught at Canadian Forces Base Gagetown to this day. Not by name,